Hey everyone, Marco here, and welcome to this video about how to grade F-Log. Now before we get into it, if you're new here, please hit that subscribe button if you want to see more content just like this in the future. I'd really appreciate it, and also hit that thumbs up button below, and also leave me a comment if you want to see something specific, one camera brand, one kind of log mode. Hit it up in a comment and I will cover it in a future video. But F-Log is basically Fujifilm's equivalent of any kind of log that you see. So S-Log, C-Log, F-Log is Fujifilm, and Fujifilm is really pushing hard in the video space. 2018 and 2019 were incredibly strong years. You had the X-T3 at the end of 2018, and then followed very shortly by the X-T30, the miniature version of the flagship X-T3. They're all capable of recording 4K. The X-T3 can do 4K 60 and 10-bit internal. Both those cameras have 10-bit clean HDMI output at 422, which is insane for things like an Atomos Ninja 5. So it's a very capable camera, and the X-T4 that's about to be announced at the end of February is going to have 4K 60, 10-bit internal 422, and IBIS and a brand new battery. So I am predicting a lot of people are going to be switching over to the Fujifilm ecosystem, mainly because Fujifilm knows color. So color science is one of the best in the mirrorless world, and just in cameras, I mean, they have been making film stock for literally over 100 years. So this video is really out for all your Fuji people and people who are going to be switching to Fujifilm, who want to get a taste of what it's going to be like color grading and editing and correcting a F-Log file. Now, one quick caveat, I am going to be using a 10-bit 422 file. If you're going to be grading a 420 8-bit file, it's going to be slightly different. You're going to get a little bit more banding. Not so much. I mean, it's a very strong codec regardless. I mean, we're talking about 400 megabits per second on the X-T3 and 200 on the X-T30. So your results should be very, very close to what I'm getting. But the caveat is I am recording or editing a ProRes HQ file that was recorded in 422. Now, if you have the X-T4 in the future and it records 422, then this should apply almost one for one to your video. So I'm going to show you how I manually grade and color correct my F-Log footage. It's just my look. That's what I like to do. But I'll show you how easy it is because it's a truly awesome color. Okay, so here we have DaVinci Resolve 16 Studio, and I already have a F-Log tutorial project here. So let's go ahead and open this guy up. And I selected just a couple clips, 3 clips right here to go look at. Again, these were all recorded in ProRes 422 on the Atomos Ninja 5 with the Fujifilm X-T30. So they're all shot in 24 frames per second again, 3840 by 2160, your standard UHD 4K. So they're already in a timeline. As you can tell, it's pretty flat, not a whole lot of colors there. Shot in F-Log. I think my, and then, you know, just normal settings. I mean, it was outside on a sunny day, so I had some ND on there. But it gives us a pretty good base from where we're starting. We have an extremely flat file that needs to be color corrected and then color graded. Now, the great thing about Fujifilm is they actually supply some LUTs right out of the box. If you go to Fujifilm's website, and I'll leave a link in the description if you need it, but they actually make 3 LUTs, and one of them is basically F-Log to Eterna. So if I use that, you can see how the clip gets pretty saturated, pretty contrasty, kind of gives it a filmic look. Now, the caveat with a LUT, especially here, is you have to make sure that you have overall pretty good white balance, good exposure to make it look good. I may not have the white balance perfectly set on this camera right now, and that's why it kind of gives it a little bit of a cooler hue to it. I can easily get that out in post with another node and get that color a little bit more warm, but just kind of gives you a very good base. Here is basically just corrected for your Rec 709. So if I take this right here and then I apply 709, it just gives it a little bit more saturation and boost. And then here is a wide dynamic range, which probably doesn't work super well with this. I mean, if you have a very dynamic or a very high dynamic range scene, this may work for you. This, I mean, it's kind of high dynamic range, but most of the image is fairly dark because it's in a shadow. It's a cloudy day, as you can tell. and the sun is behind some of those buildings, so you're not going to have that crazy contrast of bright and dark. So again, a very good base to start. Not too crazy. It really does help. So, I mean, for example, I could drag one of these LUTs onto a node and then tweak it from there. A lot of people do prefer to do that just because it kind of takes a lot of the hard work out of getting saturation contrast of the image. But again, personally, I like to work manually. So let's go ahead and start with this first clip here. We have a colorful windmill with stained glass. It's really pretty. So let's go ahead and go over to the color wheels, and I'll do Command-Shift-W on Mac, and that actually brings up my two preferred types of parades and waveforms. So I have your RGB parade, which kind of gives you a color balance, and then again, also a brightness, and then you have your Luma. And then these numbers here, 0 to 1023, essentially gives you all the channels. Because we're recording in 10-bit, there is 1024 channels of color per color. Therefore, you get from 0 to 1023. Same story with Luma, you get 1024 because it's a 10-bit file of Luma channels. So there is 1024 channels of gradation of Luma. So I can have 1024 levels of brightness from dark to extremely bright. That's what 10-bit gives you. 8-bit's a lot lower, it's only 256 per channel. This one's 1024, and then it's actually it's exponential when you get to 12-bit, 14-bit, and 16-bit. That gets much, much bigger. Overall, just kind of gives you a very good look, and it's linear. I mean, it literally tells you exactly what's in the image. So here's the sky, essentially. That's the windmill right here. You can see that's some shadows right there, and then you get some highlights and midtones on the right side. So let's go ahead and just give you a basic grade. This is how I personally like to work. This is all subjective, obviously, and the look that I'm trying to achieve is something that I want. You may want something else, but again, DaVinci Resolve is not going to hinder you whatsoever. So personally, I like to go ahead and just boost the image in general. So you have an offset here, and I actually like to work in this side here. You have an offset, which if I raise or lower will actually just change the entire image. So I like to go ahead and bump up a little bit, and you know, my highlights are not clipping whatsoever. They're actually pretty far away from clipping. And then I like to go ahead and bring down the shadows. So what's that gonna do? It's gonna actually expand that image a little bit and give you a little bit more contrast. And then you can also just go ahead and change the contrast level here by changing this by scale, or I like to personally type it usually about 1.10 to 1.15. That gives me a little bit more boost in contrast and separation. And then you also have your saturation, which personally I like to go with an F-log file between 70 and 80%. So I like to go, let's try 70 first. That looks pretty good. Let's try 80. I think I'm gonna go with 80 for now, and then if I need to change it later, I can. Now, if you select the second sub-tab here, you have color temperature, which will shift your image warm or cold. Let's just keep that at 0 for now. And then you also have a color boost. If you boost up the colors, you get oversaturation. Personally, I kind of like it just like that, so I'm gonna go ahead and just keep it there. And now, let's take a look at our Luma curve. We're seeing we're actually fairly expanded. We have things that are basically crushing or almost crushing, and we have some things that are almost clipping right over here, which I believe is, I guess that little fin is starting to blow out a little bit. So that kind of gives me a base of where I want to be. The midtones are, maybe let's bring them down just a hair bit, just to give it a little bit more contrast and separation. And if I select this Y tab here, this is actually my Luma channel. So I can bring down the shadows a little bit, and then I can boost up some of the midtones. Let's move it down here, actually. There we go. And then some of those highlights, I can try to recover them by going to the top here and bringing that down. So let's go ahead and go back to with no node, really flat image. Now with the node applied, gives you a very interesting look. This, what I would say, is fairly color corrected. You can see that I'm a little blue, so I can go back into my color temperature and I can increase a little bit of that temperature, give myself a little bit more warmth in the image. And now you can really see that it's actually a fairly good looking image. My greens are nice and green. You know, you can tell that it's a sunlit day, but it's a bright day in natural sunlight. And, you know, to me, this is really what it's supposed to look like. Now, I pan down here and I see some shops, and I just want to make sure that none of these are, you know, either crushing or blowing out. You can tell that I'm crushing a little bit of these structures, so I can take some of my shadows just a bit here, and I can go back to my Luma, and it's going to be somewhere over here. There we go. And I can just push that up a little bit. Now I know this is going to be dark, and obviously this camera has limitations of dynamic range, so I'm not going to get everything that I want, but at least I can get most of the information that I shot in this clip. Overall, I'm pretty happy in how easy it was. Again, this was super easy to do. Now, I can turn off this node, and then I can add an extra node here, and I can apply a, I can apply a LUT. So now with just the LUT, here's just a turn on, and as you can tell, it looks fairly similar actually. Turn that off, turn that one on. So this one's definitely a little bit more punchy, but overall, it's pretty good. I could also put on something like a Rec 709 LUT, and this will give me, well, not a whole lot, just gives me a little bit more saturation. But you can kind of get the point. I personally like to manually color grade my F-Log footage, and that's what I'm going to do. So let's go ahead and move to a separate type of clip. Again, this is the clip that I was talking about where it's some dynamic range challenge, but overall it's a fairly dark image. So let's go ahead and just take a look at what we're looking at. Again, you got some water fountain, you got a bright background right here, and then you have a structure that's currently somewhere in the shadows to almost midtones here. It kind of gets up to those midtones a little bit. So like I said before, I generally like to push things. So because this is a fairly darker image, I'm gonna go ahead and just push up to kind of give myself some of those details out of the woodworks. And then I can start by bringing some of those shadows down, and then our highlights are actually already clipping here. So let's bring some of those highlights down and then add my normal contrast. Let's add some saturation. Let's go 75 because it's a slightly less vibrant image. Actually, let's just go ahead and go to 80. How about that? Okay, so now we have 80. And then I can already tell that the image is a little cool. And you can actually see that in the RGB parade by seeing that these RGB channels, blue is a little higher on the highlights again, and then it's a little bit more meaty in the midtones and shadows. So what I could do is I can increase some of that color temperature. And again, you don't want to do this too much. Now, if you're working in RAW, you can just change the white balance. This is almost like a hue that you're adding to the entire image. So let's just keep it at 100. And then we can change, or we can bring some of those red levels back manually in the curves here. So now that we have this, let's go ahead and bring some of those midtones up as much as we can without blowing or losing any detail. So that kind of brightens up the scene of the building. Okay, so once we're happy with the level of the midtones, now we can go into these color curves. Again, I always like to start in the Luma just to fine tune that image. Again, we can turn off the grade and see how it used to look and now how it looks today, or I guess now. And then some of those shadows are actually being crushed. And I kind of want to bring those up just a tad to get them off of that base channel here of 0. I still want to push up the midtones just a bit. And then I'll go and try to recover some of those highlights in the sky. And you can kind of see those fluctuating as I move this up and down here. So that's actually pretty cool to see. And then, like I said, it's still a little blue. So I'm going to go into the blue channel curve. And then I'm just going to go ahead and remove some of that blue from the highlights and some of those blues from the shadows. And I don't want to do it too much where I'm starting to introduce some green, but almost just enough where I can kind of get a nice image. And I think this actually looks pretty filmic and cinematic, in my personal opinion. Again, everyone's gonna have their own look. If you like punchy and crunchy, that's completely up to you. Personally, I like a filmic, wide dynamic range type of setting where things do look a little bit more washed out, but you still get definition of your subjects and your objects in the video. So again, let's go ahead and take a look at what it used to look like, and now what it does look like. And that's a world of a difference when it comes to color correcting and grading. Now this is all a color correction phase in my personal opinion. Grading is when you actually want to stylize it. Now if you're just trying to make a filmic look, you can really do that all in one step. I mean, this would be very acceptable to me if I was just trying to get a nice filmic look. I mean, it looks really good. Skin tones, I mean, I know they're kind of hard to see, but, you know, overall they look really good. If I, you know, blow up the video here, you can see, but I mean, it does just look really, really good. Really good definition. Again, not crazy contrasty, but overall just a very good filmic look to take a look at. So let's go ahead and move over to the last clip. And this is a fairly wide dynamic range type of scene because we're getting really dark on the buildings in the sign, and then we have bright sunlight coming in. We actually get some flares as well right at the end, or right about this midpoint. So, you know, I think I want to focus right at this transition where I can kind of get a nice overall image. So I'm going to keep it there and go ahead and start my tweaks. So this time I'm going to go ahead and just bring some of this down because, you know, obviously we're clipping with the sun right here. So let's go ahead and bring that down. We're going to bring some of those shadows down just a tad. And, you know, the main thing that we want to do is bring out the midtones because that's the stuff that we don't want crushed, which is all these buildings and the sign. Let's go ahead and just boost up the contrast by 1.15. Well, let's go 1.2 and let's see how that looks. Okay, so that looks good. And then let's go 75 on the saturation. So again, you can already see a big difference in how it looks from off to on. You see that the image comes to life a little bit more. Overall, the RGB parade is actually fairly balanced, maybe a little blue. So again, you might want to add some reds in there just to kind of balance that image. So let's go ahead and try to recover as much as we can with those highlights. So obviously the sun is a very, you know, high highlight. So let's try to bring that down as much as we can without affecting much of the image. So that's probably as much as we can. And you can see some of the details in the sky. And that's really the power of something like ProRes where you're recording a 10-bit signal. It's amazing how much data you get in a baked-in look. I mean, this is not camera raw whatsoever. This is a ProRes file. You just have a lot of color data and luma data in your file, which is really, really cool. Let's go ahead and kind of bring those shadows just a hair bit down to clean up some of those that noise pattern that you would get on the black surfaces of this butcher shop sign. And then again, the midtones, let's bring those babies up and get as much detail as we can without losing anything. So what you can see is from the graded image, you see all those details in the grain of the wood on this roof or ceiling right here. We get those and we actually get some of the colors. Now, obviously the flare is going to kind of cover some of these things, and that's something that I can't fix. I mean, this is just because of the lens here that we have that flare. But overall, I mean, I think that's actually a very good looking image. We probably want to bring those shadows just a hair bit up actually, because you can tell that I'm crushing just a bit. I don't want to lose any of those color and details in the ceiling because I think the ceiling gives it a very interesting look with the wood grain. It's obviously the same building we had in the previous image. So then we can take a look at our temperature and just give it just a little bit of warmth, probably just about there. And I'd actually call that fairly balanced. You can see that, again, all the colors on the left and the highlights are really well maintained. The colors to me look very natural. Obviously, it depends on what screen you're taking a look at. You know, if you're using a color calibrated display or not, if you're looking at your phone, it probably doesn't really matter a whole lot. But overall, again, you know, grading and color correcting F-Log footage is very easy by hand, in my opinion. You know, this took me literally a few minutes, and that's because I'm talking and showing. If I was just doing this on a normal grade or edit, I'd be done in literally 45 seconds. And that's just kind of how I work. And that's how DaVinci Resolve is. It's a really powerful tool. So right at this end here, let's go ahead and take that off. See the very ugly flat look. Turn that back on, and you get this beautiful image right here with DaVinci Resolve and F-Log. Again, overall, it's a very simple process. DaVinci Resolve 16 and 16 Studio is a very powerful piece of software. It's a great editor, but again, its main forte here is color editing and grading and correcting. It's really, really easy, and I really highly recommend getting this piece of software if you do want to do some serious coloring in your videos. I hope you all enjoyed this video. Please let me know if you want to see more content just like this by subscribing and leaving a comment below. I hope you all have a great rest of your day. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys very soon.